Welcome to Pascal's China Lens of this week, and we're going to talk about sustainability. Last week I gave a keynote at the largest marketing event in Belgium called UBA Trends Days, and the host, Janka Vlerakers, asked me the question, how's China doing on sustainability? How is China doing on sustainability? Well, actually, if you look at the numbers, it's not doing very well. China is doing twice as bad as the US. It has like 28% of all the carbon dioxide emissions from the world are coming from China, 28%. US is about 15%, and Europe is about 12%, so most countries around 1% in Europe. And then a country like India is about 7%. So China's not doing very well. Now, if we look at it from a manufacturing output perspective, then what we see is that China's also at 28% of the world's manufacturing output, while the US is at 16.6%. And so that's a big difference. Now, countries like Germany and Japan are at 5 and 7% of the world's output, but they only emit about 1 to 2%, 2.5% of actually the CO2. So Germany and Japan are doing quite well. China, not so well, but compared to the US, it's doing about the same if we look at it from a manufacturing output. Now, let's not forget, most of the factories of the world are now being placed in China, and these weren't always the best, cleanest factories in the past when they started off. So they have a lot to recover. If we look historically, which could be a way to look at it, then actually China is not doing that bad, because over time, China's only produced 13% of the world's emissions or bad emissions into the atmosphere, while the US is at 25% and Europe at 22%. But yeah, we shouldn't really look at the history because it's really about today. The biggest problem in China is the coal production. 50% of the world's production of coal is happening in China. And that is not always a very clean industry. Now, China is trying to recover this and to make more new coal production happening, but it's taking time. And the problem is that despite that the mix of coal amongst all the other energy productions, like renewable energies, but also fossil fuels and other productions like natural gas, actually coal is shrinking every year. So it's getting smaller every year. But despite it's getting smaller, the amount of output of coal is still going up. And that's because China needs more and more energy because consumers are consuming more. It's about factories, but it's also about cars and air conditioners these days. So a big difference. Now, China wants to create this green China. And so they have 3 objectives. One is to reduce the carbon dioxide. The other one is to reduce the dependency on coal. And the other thing is really to have the share of this bad or not clean energy to reduce and basically improve the renewables. And so that's a great goal. And so what did China do over the past years? Well, we have to start in 2014. 2014, Li Keqiang, the premier of China, said very clear that he wants a war on pollution. And I've lived in China, in Shanghai, and I can tell you in 2014, there weren't many skies that were blue. Most of the skies were really not looking very healthy. And sometimes we stayed indoors because it was so bad. So the people feel it. And so China wanted to get clean blue skies. You go to Shanghai today, you see a lot of blue skies. So it has changed, it has improved. 2015, Xi Jinping went to Paris, signed the Paris Agreement, agreed to actually get the goals of Paris Agreement by 2030 to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide to the number that Paris actually put forward. US, on the other hand, with Trump, he bailed out just after the election. So China has taken the role of responsible, clean society for the future. And they've done that in a number of things. One of the big things that China has done is subsidies. If you look at subsidies, they're always doing it in the same way. They're giving it to producers first so that everybody starts creating wind, solar and wind and solar and other renewable energy productions. And secondly, they're giving subsidies to consumers so that they start buying electrical vehicles and solar panels and things like that. And then after a number of years, they stop the subsidies. This started like 5-6 years ago. Today, 2020, it's actually the year that it's stopping now. So China assumes that the industry is already going into that mindset. Now, is that true? I don't know. But still, this year, China has decided to invest $13 billion in subsidies into renewable energy. So it's not that bad. I mean, they're doing really an effort to keep it going. Now, what is 2020 going to be? Because if we look at last year, what we saw in 2019 is that China was actually doing quite well with results of a better, cleaner air and less pollution and less CO2 emissions. They actually have created a number of plans and initiatives. One is this national carbon market, so trading market, national carbon energy trading market, where you could trade between a polluter and a not polluter to actually get the numbers down as a total in the country, similar like many countries in Europe do. So that has been created. It's not been fully implemented yet, but that is clearly a direction China wants to go in. The other thing is the National Development Fund or Green Development Fund, which is kind of like a green credit score, where people, every factory could get a number, a score, a credit score. You remember the social credit system of China is kind of in the same direction. And if you're a factory and you're actually producing something and it's not clean, you're actually polluting, then you will get a very bad credit score, which means you will get fined, you might have to close down. And let's not forget that China and Xi Jinping, 2018, 2019, closed down thousands and thousands of factories in China because they weren't doing very well. So China is getting very serious on this. And I have a feeling that it's really changing society. The Belt and Road Initiative is another thing which is really intended to invest $8 trillion over the next 30 years, together with a lot of countries, 65 countries in the world. And this all has to be sustainable. And one of the main things there is that China has issued a lot of green bonds and green loans. It means that if you want part of this infrastructure money from China, you need to have a green mindset. And it has to be ecological. And so China is the second largest issuer of green bonds in the world. So not so bad. China really wants to have this ecological civilization that they're building. And so this is more a narrative that Xi Jinping started many, many years ago, when he said that green mountains and blue waters is more important than gold and lots of money. I mean, it's an invaluable asset, he said. So it's really something that we really have to look forward to, and we have to take priority. Now, 2020 was COVID-19, was the pandemic, and so the whole world is now balancing economic growth with other things that are more long-term vision. And so what will China do? I mean, many people in the West are predicting that China will loosen its controls over the ecological goals because they need this economy to grow. But on the other hand, China will still grow its economy by 1 to 2% this year, while most of the countries in the world will be in complete decline when it comes to GDP. The growth will be only in China happening. And so China could actually afford to keep on the long-term vision. And I believe they will. Why would they? Well, there's a number of things that are happening. First of all, China has this 2021 plan, which is the moment where the Communist Party is 100 years old. And I'm sure that China will want to show to all the Chinese in the world that this party, the country, the government, is actually serious about creating what they call a moderate society. And that means that people are living in a healthy environment. They've clearly showed that with the way that they handled the pandemic, the COVID-19 outbreak. They didn't put the economy ahead of healthcare. And I believe that many other countries in the world also have making that decision, but they took a lot longer to do it than China or many countries in the East. But China's serious. The economy has to grow, but healthcare and the population cannot suffer because of its growth. And so I believe that in the new 14-year plan, the 14th five-year plan that is happening now in 2021 to 2025, and that is getting designed this year, the last quarter of this year, I think China will take serious decisions on how to look at the next 5 years in becoming a more ecological society. And so this is all going to change now. I believe that the subsidies will continue. We've already seen that some of the subsidies this year are continuing with the $13 billion for green energy. We also see that a lot of fishing has been banned on the rivers in China. So there's initiatives being taken on a micro scale. But we also see that this could become part of this bigger plan the end of the year. And so I have a good feeling that China will continue its commitments of the Paris Agreement, that China will become the biggest producer and user of green energy in the world, which actually already it is today for many things like solar and wind energy. And most of it has been built in the past 5 years. But I think China will lead that transformation into a more sustainable society. And let's hope they do, because if they don't, I think the world will be in real serious trouble. And I think China realizes that that would backfire on them as well. So in my view, by the end of the year, we should know whether China will actually save the world by taking its commitments. So this was my story of the week about sustainability. Now, I believe that the Chinese government in general is not getting enough credit when it comes to how they're trying to transform their society to become an ecological society. I mean, they're doing so much effort that I really think China could be an inspiring place to look at how we could do it in the rest of the world. So definitely an area to watch. I hope you liked it, and see you next week for another episode of Pascal's China Lens.